Hi friends, welcome back to our Cathedral 101 time together. Today we will explore the topic of spiritual practices. Spiritual practices refers to rituals or things that we do repeatedly and on occasion that help to quiet our minds and to calm our spirits so that we can be able and more receptive to see God's workings in our lives and also in the world. Spiritual practices can include a lot of things, but really they are anything that help to lessen the distractions in our minds and open space within ourselves that will allow us to become more aware of God's presence. Classically, spiritual practices include things like praying, Bible reading, fasting, going on spiritual retreats. We see some of these spiritual practices in the Bible. At the start of his public ministry, Jesus took some time for himself and went away alone outside of town. And there he had an extended time of fasting and prayer. And then in the early years of the Christian church, there were a few folks who decided to move out to the outskirts of the cities in which they lived, and they built small one-room houses by hand. They just foraged stones that they found and built these things. And they took water from creeks or wells and brought it to where they had built their homes. They lived on vegetables that they grew and also baked some bread. And for these early Christian folks, this pattern of work, and then they would take a pause in their work several times a day and have a time of prayer. But for them, this pattern, this rhythm of praying and working was a form of spiritual practice. These folks were precursors to what we now know as nuns and monks. And the way that they structured their lives with work and prayer and the patterning of that deeply affected spiritual life after them. Today, many Episcopalians use a modified version of this rhythm of life in what's called the daily office. In using the daily office, folks combine short Bible readings with prayers. It's several times a day, normally when they wake up, in the middle of the day, and when they go to bed. But anything can be a spiritual practice if it accomplishes the goal of quieting our minds, calming our spirits, and creating space for us to become more aware of God's presence. For instance, I love to cook. Above my stove, I have an icon of a guy named Euphronesis the cook. He was a monk from a while ago, and his leader of the monastery he was a part of sent him into the kitchen to prepare food for the rest of the community. And this guy hated to cook. He viewed it as terrible drudgery and work that he was just forced to do. But over time, he began to like it. And he came to actually love cooking. And he saw it as a spiritual practice that calmed his mind and that opened himself up to the possibility of encountering God's presence. Well, for me, I've kind of adopted that spiritual practice too. When I chop vegetables, it's a form of meditation for me. It slows down my mind by forcing me to focus so that I don't accidentally chop a finger off. But that act of focus clears out all of the distracting thoughts that run through my mind at other points of the day. And at my best, I embrace that moment of cooking as an opportunity to become more attuned with God in that moment. Well, there are other things that I do that I consider spiritual practices, such as reading, kayaking, taking walks, Again, the amount of spiritual practices we can engage in are probably as many as there are people. And so I'd like us to think together about what are things that could be spiritual practices in your life.